podcast. We have myself and Schiff here as always. We're going to go through the first 5 games of the Sunday morning slate for week 2. To kick things off, we had the Niners going into Minnesota and getting upset by the Vikings 23-17. The Niners side of the ball, Brock Purdy, his stats look a little better than the game we actually saw from him if you watched the game. As me and Schiff were just talking about before the recording started, he did not look the greatest. He had multiple times throughout that game where he just did not make the right decision, and I mean, it was a surprising one, but fantasy wise, a lot of the guys did get the job done. Brock was 28 of 36 for 319 yards. He threw a touchdown and interception. He carried it twice for 12 yards, giving him just about 15. Not a terrible week, especially
Also
from...
lost that fumble,
Ye-
which I guess it could have been counted as a fumble or an interception. It
yeah.
was
Yeah.
such a strange play, but it never hit the ground.
Yeah. It... Yeah, no, that's very fair. His pass catchers had some solid days, at least 2 of the 3. Debo saw 10 targets, caught 8 of them for 110 yards. He carried it twice and went backwards 10 yards. He still gave us 18 fantasy points. Now, Debo did get injured, and he's projected to miss a couple weeks. We'll get into that more in our injury report, and you will see as we cover these games, there have been a lot of notable injuries. Brandon Ayuk, again, not crazy involved in this offense just yet. He was only targeted 5 times, caught 4 of them for 43 yards, giving him 8.3. Juwan Jennings, who, again, we'll talk about in a later episode, is going to have to be more of a vocal point in this offense. He caught 2 of his 4 targets for 37 yards, giving him 5.7. And George Kittle has been getting it done. Caught 7 of his 8 targets for 76 yards and a touchdown, giving him 20.6. And as we know, anyone can run behind this 49er offensive line, and Jordan Mason has been doing just that. Carried the ball 20 times for 100 yards even and a touchdown. Caught his lone target for 4 yards, giving him 17.4. And if you are, for whatever reason, looking to hold the backup to Jordan Mason until McCaffrey comes back, it is Kyle Juszczyk. He's the only other running back, fullback getting any viable play. He played 57% of the snaps. He was targeted 5 times out of the backfield. He caught 3 of them for 19 yards, giving him 4.9. Outside of that, obviously the Niners didn't score very much. Jake Moody had 5 fantasy points, and the defense did cause some havoc, some sacks. You know, they got it done. If you did start them, they gave you 10.
Yeah, just kind of looking at the Niners, George Kittle's listed as questionable right now as of the last 2 days as far as the updates on Sleeper. There hasn't been any updates at all, so we'll be looking into that for sure, given
Mm-hmm.
George Kittle kind of seems like the best of the highly drafted tight ends right now, especially with Christian McCaffrey being out, because that leaves sort of while Jordan Mason is a very good running back, running between the tackles, he obviously does not offer the same dynamic ability that Christian McCaffrey does
Yeah.
as a pass catcher. Therefore, they're going to have to lean a little bit more on George Kittle, on Debo Samuel. Hopefully, we'd like to see a little bit more out of Brandon Ayuk. He's not getting the targets we'd like. He got one in the end zone that wasn't the greatest target, still wasn't able to connect on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's at least 2 end zone targets in the first 2 games, but we'd just like to see a little more volume given where we took him and, how much they paid him.
Yeah.
Um, but with that, going into the Vikings side of the ball, we saw a lot of good things. Sam Darnold was the QB4 on the week and is currently the QB9 overall. He was 17 for 26 with 268 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, which
Yeah.
I think that was kind of the thing about Sam Darnold coming into this year. It was kind of those plays, like the one that he threw the interception on was a bit of a head scratcher. It looked like if Fred Warner didn't pick it, the safety that was covering Jalen Nailor would have picked it.
Yeah.
But I believe it was Nailor he was throwing the ball to anyways, but that didn't matter. It was a horrible pass. But it's not seeming like he's doing too much of that. He had a great game against the Knights. Also ran the ball 5 times for 32 yards, finished with
Yeah.
20.92 points. So it was, I mean, this is what we wanted to see going up against a much tougher San Francisco defense than the Giants that they played last week. We wanted to see, okay, can Sam Darnold really get it done? He seemed to be able to.
Yeah.
Going into the running back room, where I think there's now a bit of confusion because Aaron Jones ran the ball for 32 yards on his 9 attempts. Also was able to haul in 5 of his 6 targets for 36 yards. Also lost a fumble on his way into the end zone, which could have greatly changed his day, but
Yeah.
Fred Warner wasn't about to let that happen. So he finished the day with 9.8 points. Aaron Jones currently sitting at the RB 18 overall, kind of where we viewed him a little bit as a
Yeah.
low end RB2 kind of option. If he's not getting in the end zone, I don't think he'll see the greatest of days, especially when you have Ty Chandler, the next guy up, running the ball much more efficiently than he was. Ran 10 times for 82 yards, didn't get any targets out of the backfield, but if Ty Chandler continues to be efficient on the ground, it will help this offense a lot, and I think they're going to continue to use him. Just looking at the splits, Aaron Jones got 61% of the snaps, and Ty Chandler only got 35%. But with those splits, what Ty Chandler was able to do with his usage, I think he's a definite decent option to pick up
Mm-hmm.
if they're going to continue using him like this. Granted, it's only been 2 weeks, but I think I'm interested in him moving forward, kind of like we said the last 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
Going into the receivers, Justin Jefferson had a 97-yard touchdown, which greatly helped his day.
Yeah.
Was a beautiful pass from Sam Darnold, and just Justin Jefferson doing Justin Jefferson things. The reason why I had him listed as my fantasy MVP based on where he was going in the first round, and it really showed in this game against San Francisco that he is that good.
Mm-hmm.
He can get it done. You just got to put the ball close enough for him to get it. Finished with 133 yards on 4 catches out of 7 targets. Also, that touchdown giving him 23.3 points. He is currently the wide receiver 6 on the year. And funny enough, even with that finish, 23.3 points was only the wide receiver 9 this week. So we did tell you guys, week 1 was a bit shaky. But looking at this week, the wide receivers performed a lot better.
Yeah.
As you can see, a 23.3 point finish, only getting Jefferson to the wide receiver 9. Someone that I brought up in our preview of this game was Jalen Nailor
Mm-hmm.
as kind of a fringe flex option if you needed somewhere to go. I saw people starting some interesting names this week, and I figured Jalen Nailor would be one to throw out there.
Yeah.
He ended up catching 3 of his 4 targets for 54 yards and a touchdown, finishing with 11.4 points. But he did receive 2 end zone targets in this game. And he looked real. I mean, there was one, I think, later in the game, might have been the fourth quarter. Sam Darnold went down the field to Jalen Nailor, and he like completely turned his body in midair to make the catch. He looks good out there, is what I'm trying to get at. And with Jordan Addison currently injured, I think he's a pretty decent option for like a flex kind of,
Yeah.
a flyer every week, just due to the fact that this Vikings offense looks better than we gave them credit for coming into this season, and their defense is putting them in great positions.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking on that, their defense and special teams, they blocked one punt,
Mm-hmm.
which led to a touchdown, and then their I mean, they had one interception that you could count 2 interceptions or a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. I don't know. The ball was in the air and Jihad Ward caught it. So
Yeah.
define that as you will. But this defense was extremely disruptive against a very good Niners team. 6 sacks registered. So they finished with 14 points. They're currently the number 1 defense in fantasy football.
Yeah.
Got some tough matchups coming up, but they are definitely, with the addition of Stephon Gilmore, the way that they played through the first 2 weeks, obviously they played the Giants week 1, but just seeing how disruptive they were against San Francisco in week 2, I
Hmm.
think this is going to be one of the best streaming defenses of the year. And their kicker, Will Reichard, the leading scorer in NCAA football history, added on 11 fantasy points for the Vikings. So
Yeah. No, I think Jalen Naylor, you may have. I mean, it's a really good call out, especially with Jordan Addison out. As long as he's out.
he did play 93% of the snaps this week.
Well, and the thing
Genuinely.
is as in Hawkinson, they're said they're eyeing a week 7 return. So without Hawkinson, they don't really have a great tight end. And if Jordan Addison's missing, you really have Jettas out there and that number 2 spot for the taking. And Jalen Naylor seems to be that guy. Sam Darnold's been getting it done through the air for us. So yeah, I don't mind that at all.
Yeah, wide receiver 22 finish on the week, finishes in the top 24. I mean,
Yeah,
definitely worth looking at.
for sure.
And that'll take us into our next game, though, where it was Seattle going into New England. The over-under in this one was 38, and Seattle was favored by 3, which they covered in overtime. Seattle ended up winning this one 23-20.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be tough for any Patriots fan. They had, I think it was just over 3 minutes left in the game, 48-yard field goal attempt to go up by 6, and it gets blocked. Seahawks come down, kick the field goal to take it into overtime. Saw a lot of heartbreakers this week, that one
Yeah.
included. But for the Seahawks, we saw a lot of good things on the offensive side of the ball. Geno Smith apparently heard what I had to say about Christian Gonzalez and the Patriots secondary and took them for a bit of a ride. Threw the
Yeah.
ball 44 times, completed 33 of those for 327 yards and a touchdown. Also ran the ball 5 times for 8 yards. 17.9 points, not the greatest, but if you had streamed Geno this week, it was definitely better than a lot of other options.
Mm-hmm.
Zach Charbonnet, exactly what we talked about. Not efficient on the ground. If he happens to fall into the end zone, you're going to be happy, but it's really his pass catching, which kind of, he relies on a bit like we have viewed Rashad White, Alvin Kamara in the past.
Yeah.
Clearly not Alvin Kamara right now, as we'll get to later, but Charbonnet was 14 attempts for 38 yards on the ground, only 2.7 yards per carry. He got that touchdown, however, caught all 5 of his targets for 31 yards. So he finished with 17.9 points,
Mm-hmm.
which is a pretty good day. Put him at RB8 on the week. Um, as long as Ken Walker's out, you're going to see him get the volume.
Yeah.
There's not really much behind him at all in the way of a backup. He was out there for 96% of the snaps, if that tells you anything. So he will get all the work. It's just we'd hope he could be a little bit more efficient with it.
Yeah.
A guy who also apparently, well, let me just take a step back and say I completely missed on the Seattle pass catchers this week. It was
Yeah.
obvious that you were starting DK Metcalf if you had him.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a guy that you bench. But as far as the roles of Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith-Njigba, I could not have been more wrong. JSN was the lead target getter in this game by 2 targets over DK Metcalf, but still. 16 targets, caught 12 of them for 117 yards, giving him 23.7 fantasy points. Him and Tyler Lockett completely reversed roles. JSN was involved early and often in this one
Mm-hmm.
from the jump. I mean, and it wasn't just the low average depth of target that we were used to seeing from him. They were actually
Yeah.
throwing it to him deep over the middle of the field, on the sidelines. I mean, it was what we had hoped to see from Jackson Smith-Njigba from jump. But whether or not this is something that we'll see week in and week out, I don't know. I'm definitely more comfortable throwing him in my lineup now
Yeah.
that I see like, okay, they are willing to treat him like the receiver he is, not just a little gadget guy. So if that continues, he's going to prove to be very valuable. And DK, um, yeah, like I said, kind of heard me about the Christian Gonzalez treatment. It is clearly not the same as the Pat Surtain treatment. DK caught 10 of his 14 targets, 429 in the touchdown, 28.9 fantasy points. Have a
Monster
day.
week.
Yeah. And then for the rest of them, I mean, Tyler Lockett caught both of his passes for 15 yards, 3.5 points, just like Jake Bobo. Literally same exact stat line. Obviously, the difference is Tyler Lockett's playing 81% of the snaps while Jake Bobo is playing 20. So whether it kind of switches off JSN and Tyler Lockett, who has that involvement, I don't know. But seeing JSN get involved in that type of way definitely makes me a lot more confident for the rest of the year. Noah Fant is the leading tight end on this team, but it doesn't really amount to much. He caught one of his 3 targets for 14 yards. Jason Myers added 9 fantasy points in the kicking game, and Seattle's defense gave you 7. So that's really all I got for the Seahawks. Sorry, guys, I was really wrong there on my call this week.
I mean, but what we had to go off, we saw what they've done with JSN last season. We saw how they came out week 1. I'm sure even the people that still had faith in him and said, okay, I'm going to put him in this week due to injury, whatever the case, did not expect that. But now that we have seen that, it just makes it more mixy. Obviously, it just reminds me of Houston a little bit, of the 3 receivers. Not all of them are going to hold value. But obviously, JSN and Tyler Lockett went a lot later than a Diggs or a Tank Dell. So getting this value from JSN and possibly playing his upside can be pretty massive for you if he maintains, the amount of usage he was getting this week. So I'm curious to see how week 3 goes. But JSN could be, they drafted him high for a reason. The Patriots side of the ball, it's never pretty with Jacoby as the quarterback. He went 15 of 27 for 149 yards. He threw a touchdown, didn't throw a pick, carried it twice for 6 yards, gave us 10.5 fantasy points. It's just having a receiver, any pass catcher on the Patriots is just scary. Like Jalen Polk was the leading fantasy receiver for them. And he had 2 catches for 12 yards and a touchdown. He ran it once for no yards. He gave you 9.2. The only other receiver to catch a pass was KJ Osborne, which caught one of his 2 targets for 7 yards, giving you 1.7. Demario Douglas, Tyquan Thornton gave you 0s this week. Austin Hooper caught his lone target. The big name from this week is Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry's that guy in fantasy that every season I'm like, he's going to fade away. Like, this is the year he just will not, and then he has a week like this. He catches 8 of his 12 targets for 109 yards, giving him 18.9. And with that finish, through 2 weeks, he's now the tight end 5. Despite giving you 3.8 the first week. It just shows you how the tight ends have gone. Now his next, 5 weeks, and albeit a lot of tight ends have struggled, but his next 5 weeks do not look very good against teams, specifically against the tight end position. But depending who you have, it almost, as of now, until we see more stability, it almost feels like throwing darts at the wall with who to start at tight end, because we just see random huge weeks. But Hunter Henry, I guess he's a guy I would maybe monitor, but I'm not, until I see Drake May out there, I'm not too excited for the Patriots pass catchers. And that's if Drake May performs. So still the only guy I'm really interested in is Mondre. He's getting the usage through the first 2 weeks. He's getting the snap share. He played 72% of snaps. He carried it 21 times for 81 yards and a touchdown. He caught 2 of his 5 targets for 9 yards. It gave him 17. Another great week for Mondre. And Antonio Gibson was weirdly efficient on the ground, something we don't expect from him. He's another one of those backs that pass catch first. He caught his lone target for 7 yards, but he ran for 96 yards on his 11 carries, giving him 11.3. He played 24% of the snaps. I'm still not interested in Antonio Gibson on like a week in and week out basis. If you have Mondre and you're potentially worried about an injury at some point and you want to hold Gibson as a handcuff, I don't mind that completely, but I think seeing him rush for 96 yards on 11 carries is more of an anomaly than what we're going to see consistently. So, I mean, that's really that. Joey Sly finished with 7 fantasy points. He did miss a field goal. Or technically not. But it counts all the same
Counts
in fantasy. Exactly. The defense gave you 3 points. That's really it. I mean, yeah, the Patriots are just a weird fantasy team to buy parts in. It's not one of the offenses.
Especially right now, as far as their offensive philosophy, it seems a lot like the Chargers in the essence of they want to play good defense and run the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So taking that stance, I don't mind adding Antonio Gibson.
Yeah.
Because if he's going to get if they're going to be running the ball that much, as much as they want to use Ramondre, it wouldn't surprise me to see Antonio Gibson get around 10 carries a game.
Yeah.
Just because their most reliable pass catcher is Hunter Henry. And I mean, I don't know. It's just hard to read into what the Patriots are going to do week in, week out throwing the ball, but we know they're going to run the ball at least like 30 times.
No, that's absolutely valid. That'll take us to one of our, what was the stat from the Giants? The Giants at the Commanders. The Commanders won 21-18. The Giants are the first team in Super Bowl era. What was it? They scored multiple touchdowns. They didn't give up a touchdown.
To score 3 touchdowns and lose to a team that didn't score a touchdown.
At some point, luck is just not on their side. And when Graham Gano gets hurt, so you have to bring in your punter, who misses the first extra point. So then they have no confidence in the extra point, so they have to go for 2 on their next 2 touchdowns, and they don't get either of them. And then they lose by 3 points that Graham Gano probably would have gave them on the 3 extra points. There's some things you can't even make up, and this is one of those. I genuinely feel bad for Giants fans. That is just a rough way to go out. It is worth talking about that Daniel Jones had a bit of a better day, albeit against the Commanders secondary, but you know what? He did get it done fantasy-wise. He was 16 of 28.
And he gets to play them one more time.
That's true.
At home.
And and I was going to say, depending your quarterback situation, like if you're dealing with whatever the case, I know it's later in the season, if you're dealing with an injury or something like that, I had this thought in the back of my head. I'm like, Daniel Jones would not be a bad play this week. And he wasn't. He finishes the QB 5 this week. He was 16 of 28, 178 yards.
QB 6 after.
Oh, after Jalen.
That was before
You're
Jalen,
correct.
yeah.
I wrote the notes before he finished QB 6 after Jalen. But yeah, he threw 178 yards. He threw 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, carried it 5 times for 32 yards, giving him 18.32. A solid week for him. Devin Singletary has been the absolute lead back here. The only one getting real volume. 16 carries for 95 yards and a touchdown. Caught his lone target for no yards, but that's a point. 14.5 fantasy points. Tyrone Tracy carried the ball 1 time in this game in his 21% of snaps. So, barring injury, it does seem like Devin Singletary is going to be the absolute workhorse here.
And he did look pretty good running the ball.
No, he did. So if you grabbed him late round, I mean, it seems like a pretty value pick at this point in the season. And the highly touted Malik Neighbors. How much were the Giants going to use him? The answer is an insane amount. He was targeted 18 times, caught 10 of them for 127 yards and a touchdown, 28.7 fantasy points. At this point, no matter if he even fell a couple rounds in your draft and you have wide receiver depth, Malik Neighbors needs to be in your lineup. He just has to. He's young, he's explosive, and it's clear that the Giants plan on centering the offense around him when Daniel Jones throws 28 passes total and 18 of them are to Malik Neighbors. That is, we talk about pieces of the pie. Dude got over half the pie. I mean, that is just insane to see.
Yeah, he had a target share of over 60%.
That's
which is
just unbelievable. That's Cooper
not
Cup numbers.
sustainable. As we
No.
saw with Cooper Cup too, it's not sustainable. But the fact that they will hyper target the man, oh my God.
Yeah.
We're due for huge weeks.
No,
Like
for
this.
sure. Absolutely. The other receivers each saw 4 targets. Wandell caught 2 of them for 18 yards and a touchdown. So if you did pick him up off the waiver and you plugged him in, he did not
I
burn
said
you at
this
all.
was the week.
Yeah.
This was the week.
Yeah, he finished with 9.8. The wide receiver who's on the field more is still Darius Slayton. He caught 3 of his 4 targets for 33, giving him 6.3. Malik Neighbors is the guy we start every week. Wandell, I think, is still worth holding on to due to playmaking ability, but we'll see as the weeks go on. Not a single tight end got a target for the Giants. As we mentioned, Graham Gano got hurt in the defense, only gave up field goals. Honestly, they did their best. They finished with 5 fantasy points. It wasn't awful. We're not looking at the Giants defense ever, but I have to give them some props. They tried their best.
The fact that you're saying they did their best about an NFL team is just crazy, but you're not. It's just so sad. It's like they get a participation award.
They do.
But yeah, that's about what we expected with the Giants. A little bit of nasty volume with Devin Singletary, albeit he did look pretty good. I said if you wanted to throw in Wandale this week, I think this was the week to do it. And of course, Malik 8. So going over to the Commanders side of the ball, where not a touchdown was scored, yet they scored 21 points. Jaden Daniels was 23 for 29, 226 yards, also ran the ball 10 times for 44 yards, 13.4 fantasy points.
Yeah.
As you guys know, if a quarterback's not throwing touchdown passes or running them in on the ground, they're not really going to finish with that big of a day. Brian Robinson, wow. Ran the ball 17 times for 133 yards. Unfortunately, only caught one of his 3 targets for 3 yards, but gave you 14.6 points. And, I mean, that was a, let's see, not as good as I had thought. Running back, or 14.6 points, yeah. Running back 21 on the week, right in front of Devin Singletary, running back 22. So not the best, but not the worst. Still a pretty decent performance that would have kept you afloat.
For sure.
Surprising. One thing I mentioned was if you wanted to flex Austin Eckler in this one, I thought it would be a competitive game, and therefore he would get some involvement. He ran the ball eight times for 38 yards, also caught all 3 of his targets for 47 yards. So he finished with 11.5 points.
Yeah.
Given some of the other performance we saw this week, like our next guy that I'm going to talk about, I don't think that would have really burned you. Terry McLaurin, on the other hand, might have. He caught 6 of his 8 targets for 22 yards, giving you 8.2 fantasy points. Now, the thing about Terry is, yes, I am worried, but I don't know if I'm as worried as I am about like Christian Kirk or, even Michael Pittman. As far as like Christian Kirk, his role in the offense is just really weird right now. But Michael Pittman, as far as Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, I think I just have more faith in Jaden Daniels as a pure volume passer. I
Yeah.
think he has more of a capability to work the intermediate and sides of the field, get it over the middle. some of the shorter stuff without throwing interceptions a million times a game. While he didn't throw a touchdown, he didn't throw a pick or fumble once. So he was clean in this one, which allowed the Commanders to win the football game.
Yeah.
So I have a bit more faith in that passing attack going throughout the rest of the year. And they will end up playing teams like the next week when they go up against the Bengals, who have a bit more firepower on the offensive side of the ball than the Giants do. So I think they're going to be forced into a position where they have to move the ball downfield a bit more. And I think Terry should be okay. I do like the 8 targets. Obviously, the 22 yards, we need to get that up. But I'm not panicking as much about him as I am some of these other guys. Still
Yeah.
worried, just not fully red alert yet.
For sure.
Um, Going down the line, I mean, you had Noah Brown catch, unfortunately, outscore Terry McLaurin. He caught all 3 of his targets for 56 yards, giving him 8.6 fantasy points. And that right there is like one of the reasons why I have a bit more faith. Just because Terry McLaurin is the most talented wide receiver on this roster. If they
Oh
could
yeah.
get a little bit more chemistry, I think it will bear fruit for the rest of the season. De'Ami Brown caught 2 of his 4 targets for 17. Olamide Zaccheaus added 3 catches on his 3 targets for 14 yards. And Zach Ertz, a guy that I said,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to throw him in this week, it's not the, most sexy start at the tight end position. But if he started the old man this week, he caught 4 of his 4 targets for 62 yards, giving you 10.2 points. And the MVP in this one, Austin Siebert, 22 fantasy points, 7 for 7 on field goals. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yeah, Washington's defense added 5 points. Woohoo.
Yeah, I like that. Zach Ertz, as long as he's healthy, I feel like he's just shown us he will not
He's
zero you.
reliable.
Yeah, he will get
He's
you
just
3 to 5
reliable, and
catches.
he's with a rookie quarterback.
Dude, if you told me in 2024 through 2 weeks Zach Ertz would be the tight end 8, you got it. Like, that's it. You got it.
Yeah.
It's just.
And it's like the situation just works out really well for him. And like also
Mm-hmm.
Austin Eckler, just for some slight fantasy value, a team that'll probably be behind in a lot of games. And they're 2 reliable pass catchers
Yeah.
that will end up being close to the line of scrimmage a lot more times than not.
Yeah.
That'll take us into our next game. The Chargers went to Carolina to decimate the Panthers 26-3. Clearly not reaching the over-under in this one, which was 39. Chargers were favored by 5 points. They smashed that. But kind of what we saw was what we thought we would see,
Yep.
with the exception of the Quentin Johnston performance. But Justin Herbert was 14 for 20, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception. Ran the ball 6 times for 18 yards and lost a fumble. So
Mm-hmm.
he finished with 12 points exactly. You don't really want to start quarterbacks against Carolina's defense, not because they're extremely good on against the pass. There's no reason to pass the ball too much against them. You're not going to see quarterbacks throw for like too many more times than 20 is probably going to be the average number of passing attempts you see against the Carolina Panthers,
Yeah.
in my opinion. You saw the Chargers run the ball 35 times with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, 17 for J.K., 131 yards and a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Also caught his lone target for no yards, but it still added a point, so
Yep.
it gave him 20.1 fantasy points. Another great day out of J.K. Dobbins. He is currently the
RB4.
RB, 4 on the season, right in front of Brees Hall, which I'm sure we were all expecting. Gus Edwards had 18 attempts for 59 yards, didn't get a target, but finished with 5.9 points. I think Gus is definitely very valuable and worth holding on to. One thing we haven't seen is J.K. Dobbins play a complete season. I'm not wishing anything upon him, but Gus has been a little more solid throughout his career. I think later in the season, he'll have some value. Gus will end up falling into the end zone a few times.
For sure.
Not a guy that I'd drop right now, especially with all the early season injuries that have been blessing us. I think Gus could have some value, at least to never really zero you in that department,
Yeah.
because the Chargers are going to run the ball a lot every week, no matter who they play.
Mm-hmm.
Going into the pass catchers, I'm going to start off with a guy that I'm actually really interested in on waivers this week. He finished this week as, let me see, the that's season stats. Finished this week as the wide receiver 12. Someone we finally saw life out of, Quentin Johnston.
Yeah.
He caught 5 of his 6 targets for 51 yards and 2 touchdowns, 22.1 fantasy points. Yes, it was against the Panthers, but we don't see people pass against the Panthers. Just the fact that he got 6 targets and Herbert only threw the ball 20 times. He's the
Mm-hmm.
big body guy. The problem last year was he wasn't able to really catch the ball. Well, if he's gotten over that hump, I do believe he's a lot more talented than Josh Palmer.
Yes.
And him and Lad McConkey don't exactly play the same role.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Quentin Johnston will get those downfield targets, which we know Justin Herbert is good at delivering. We saw very well with Mike Williams that is a valuable role. Um, yeah, I think I'm kind of going hard a little bit for Quentin Johnston as far as waivers this week, just looking at what else is available. If he is truly to be that number one option in the Chargers pass attack, we know they're not going to just be able to only run the ball every week. They're not going to be up every week.
Yeah.
So if they're put in a position where they have to pass the ball at a higher rate, I think Quentin Johnston is due for some good weeks.
For sure.
Excuse me. But that moves us into Lad McConkey, caught 2 of his 4 targets for 26 yards. It's not going to be great every week with him. Last week he got in the end zone. He had a good week. This week he didn't. Week wasn't so good. Josh Palmer, I think I've seen enough. Quentin Johnston, Lad McConkey are both better football players than he is. And I think the Chargers realize that. Palmer finished with 2 catches on 2 targets for 19 yards. And yeah, as far as the splits, Palmer also played the least amount of snaps this week. Quentin Johnston played 70%, Lad McConkey 49%, Josh Palmer 43%. Just 2 more snaps than Simi Fehoko.
Stop.
So, uh, and then the tight ends, Will Dissly got some involvement, caught all 3 of his targets for 29 yards, 5.9 points out of him. And then Hayden Hurst caught one of his 2 targets for 5 yards, 1.5 points. And those 2 are pretty much splitting time, 55% of the snaps for Hurst and 51% for Dissly. So it's kind of hard to navigate there. If you could put both tight ends into one player, it'd be a lot nicer, but we can't do that. Dicker finished with 9 points. Chargers defense finished with 11. And I think they're sitting at like DST number 2 or 3 on the year. They are currently
number 3.
DST number 3. So, yeah, that's all I got for the Chargers.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Quentin, there's real reason to be interested in Quentin Johnston. Him and Ladd are tied for the most targets through 2 weeks with 11. And then you look at, Ladd's rostered in 87% of leagues, Quentin Johnston at 16. They did draft Quentin Johnston very high just last year. He had a bit of a rough year, but he's behind Keenan and Mike Williams. Both those guys leave, and then people are, Josh Palmer's going to be the number. No, he is not. No, he is not. It's going to be one of the guys they drafted very high, as Schiff mentioned. Him and Ladd don't exactly play the same role. And as we get into weeks, where they have to pass more, I think Quentin Johnston, as long as he can hold on to the ball, which I do believe he can begin to do, I think he's worth looking at on your roster. There's people still have Josh Palmer rostered. If you ask me which one you should have, it's obviously Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston or like a Curtis Samuel at this point. I'm going towards Quentin Johnston. It's just his upside is a lot higher than some of these guys we drafted and we're holding on to.
Yeah, it's pretty cut and dry for me.
Yeah, and to go to the Panthers side of the ball, it was just another abysmal week for just about everyone. Bryce Young is now benched. We will cover that in the next week, but he played the entire game in this one. He completed 18 of his 26 passes for a very solid 84 yards. He threw one of the worst interceptions I have seen this season, where he stared straight into double coverage about 10 yards up the field, right in front of him, and said, "Let me throw it. What could happen?" And it gets intercepted. He carried it one time for 6 yards. He finished 3 fantasy points. It's crazy. I'm not saying they're fully pulling the plug, but for him to have only started a single season and be 2 games into the season and benched as the number 1 pick is not a good sign.
I don't think it's the best sign, but at the same time, Dave Canales didn't. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things when the new head coach comes in. If that's not their guy that they drafted,
Yeah.
they're not going to just sit here and let you make them lose their job. So if they believe, which granted, we both watched Andy Dalton play for the Panthers last year. I believe he was better for them than
He
Bryce
is.
Young was. So if that's who Canales believes gives them a better opportunity to win games and kind of save his ass, I don't blame him. It's his first year as a head coach, so.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why, like, when going through these receivers, I think they have a bit higher upside with Andy Dalton going forward. Albeit I don't think it's an insane amount more, but I do think, like, Deontay catches 3 passes for 15 yards on 6 targets, giving him 4.5. I think he can have better weeks with Andy Dalton. I think Andy Dalton's more capable than Bryce Young to get the ball downfield. I just don't know how much more at this point in Dalton's career. But it's definite improvement. Thielen, really all the receivers were super irrelevant in this. Thielen caught 2 of his 3 targets for 20 yards, giving him 4. Jonathan Mingo caught 1 of his 2 for a single yard, giving him 1.1. Xavier Legette was not even targeted in his 42% of snaps. The tight ends, Tommy Tremble gives you 5.3. Jatavian Sanders gives you 2.8. Chuba Hubbard actually had a solid fantasy week. He carried it 10 times for 64 yards, caught 4 of his 5 targets for 12, giving you 11.6. He played 58% of snaps. Miles Sanders played the other 42, carrying it 7 times for 20 yards, caught all 3 of his targets for 5, giving you 5.5. It's just something we've seen, and it's only Bryce Young's second year, but it's something we see with Bo Nix. Something that Jaden Daniels, at least so far, hasn't done the best at, and it's getting the ball downfield, even to a degree. Bo Nix especially. Bo Nix and Bryce Young are in the same spot where none of their pass completions are very far downfield, and it's just going to hurt because you're seeing guys get multiple catches. Like when Deontay catches 3 passes for only 15 yards, it's just not ideal. But we'll see going forward. As of now, the Panthers' offense looks by far the worst in the NFL. But again, we'll see with Andy Dalton. I hope we don't see good things from Andy Dalton, though, because they do play the Raiders next week. But a lot more hopeful. The kicker gave you 3, Eddie Pinheiro. The defense somehow gave you 6, giving up 20. Which isn't bad. I had to note that because I was surprised. The defense still giving you 6 fantasy points while giving up 26 and their offense doing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I know you don't hope to see too much from Andy Dalton, but it's like we need to see something. 3
For
weeks
sure.
of inactivity from anybody on that roster is just going to be catastrophic. I mean, we knew they'd be bad, but
yeah, it's tough too because like the panic meter for Deontay especially, he's the highest drafted player on that team in fantasy, is extremely high. If he does not perform well with Andy Dalton either, it gets to a point where his trade value is just so far gone with no upside in sight that it just, I mean, you have to keep him rostered. It just gets very, very scary.
Yeah.
Our last game was a bit of a surprise of how it went. It was the Saints demolishing the Cowboys in Dallas 44-19. Derek Carr is on an absolute just tear through the first 2 weeks. The crazy part in this game, he only completed 11 passes of his 16 attempts for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns. He threw an interception. He also got in with his legs on the ground, something you rarely see from Derek Carr, but shout out to him. Giving him 22.82 fantasy points, finishing as the quarterback 2 on the week. Potentially quarterback 3 after Jalen. Quarterback 3 after Jalen. Kamara. It feels like we see this game once a year, and it came early for him. Or at least, no, it was a couple years ago when he got the 6 touchdowns. Either way, it feels like Kamara has a game every year where he just absolutely explodes. And it was this week in Dallas. He carried it 20 times for 115 yards, 3 touchdowns, caught 2 of his 3 targets for 65 yards and a touchdown, giving him 44 fantasy points. If you played against Kamara, you probably lost. And if you had Kamara, you probably won. And if you had him and you lost, that is incredible.
Yeah, he's currently the number 1 overall fantasy performer by over 10 points.
And that does not surprise me. That's just a massive week. Chris Olave, we saw some life from. He caught 4 of his 6 targets for 81 yards. He rushed it 1 time for 7 yards, giving him 12.8. Derek Carr's favorite target down the field so far has been Rashid
Have a
Shaheed.
need for Shaheed.
It's been like this. It was like this last year, and it's continuing over this season. He caught all 4 of his targets for 96 and a touchdown. He carried it 3 times for 13, giving him 20.9 fantasy points. He's been very solid for them. Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau did not see a target. Foster Moreau was out there 80% of snaps. I presume a lot of that being blocking. But worth noting, neither of them were targeted. Taysom Hill was not very involved. He caught his lone target for a single yard. He carried it 3 times for 18 yards, giving him 2.9 fantasy points. It was a weird week. They went up a lot, and it kind of stayed that way. We saw Javonte, start to get some garbage time work. He got Jamal Williams. I have Williams written, and my first thought was Javonte.
You're good.
But Jamal, he had his 8 carries for 39 yards, giving him 3.9. If Derek Carr can continue to perform at this level, or even around this level, I mean, Kamara has his value. Olave, I still want to see more from him, but Rashid Shaheed, man, that is looking like a snag late in the draft.
Rashid Shaheed is currently the wide receiver 9 on the year.
And probably the 30th to 35th drafted, if not later.
Yeah, if not later. I mean, it's him and one other guy. Honestly, Shaheed is rightfully rostered in a lot of leagues, but another Alec Pierce is one that kind of plays the same role for his team that was 1 spot above him at wide receiver 8. Granted, we'll talk about him more during the Colts game and during the waivers, but it's like him and Shaheed. It's, last year it was more of an inconsistent kind of like they'd have their games, they get the deal. But it's like if we're seeing this every week, can we really rely on it? It's to be determined and to be talked about more, but definitely something that I've got my eye on. Going into the Cowboys side of the ball, it was a fairly disappointing day for most across the board. Most, I say. Not all. Dak Prescott was 27 for 39, 293 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks, and 2 rushing attempts for 12 yards, giving him 14.92 fantasy points. Week 1, it's kind of funny because you both games have been blowouts. It's, it's kind of hard to really judge too much on
Yeah.
like, oh, how, yeah, you had the 2 picks. They go up against the Ravens next week. You saw them give up the world to Devontae Adams on Sunday. I do believe CeeDee Lamb is going to destroy that secondary. So I'm not really worried about Dak moving forward, at least as much as I am about some of these other quarterbacks. I think he'll have much better weeks. The Saints damn well could be the real deal.
They do look legit.
Um,
They do.
that was one thing we talked about, whether or not the Saints were real coming into this week, and they look legit for real.
Mm-hmm.
So outside of Dak, though, the running back room, man, it's gross as we kind of thought it would be. It's you had Zeke with 40% of the snaps, Rico Dowdle with 43% of the snaps, and Deuce Vaughn and Hunter Lipke each getting themselves 14%. So Rico Dowdle led the running back room with 7 attempts, 30 yards, also caught 4 of his 5 targets for 29 yards. He gave you 9.9 points.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just hard to say on a week in and week out basis which one of these two running backs, Zeke or Rico Dowdle, is going to be the main focus. You'd like to think that it would be Rico Dowdle, who has a bit more, I wouldn't say is more talented, but he just has a little bit more in the tank at this point in both of their careers.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Zeke ran the ball 6 times for 16 yards, caught 2 of his 3 targets for 16 yards, giving him 5.2
Yeah.
points. It's just going to be kind of a headache trying to decide week in and week out which one of these two running backs is the start. And the answer is going to be on most weeks, whichever one falls into the end zone. A
Yeah.
lot more times than not, I think that would be Zeke. It's hard to say if Rico Dowdle is truly going to get that Tony Pollard role from a couple years ago. I'd like to think he has the juice and the talent for it, but we'll just see moving forward. CeeDee Lamb had a good week, one that we'd love to see out of him. Had a wonderful touchdown where he caught the ball, split 2 defenders, and took it home.
Yeah.
Caught 4 of his 7 targets for 90 yards and that touchdown, finishing with 19 points. The next best guy in this wide receiver room was Jalen Tolbert. Actually led the team in targets
Yeah.
and, well, tied the team in catches, but caught 6 of his 9 targets for 82 yards, giving him 14.2 points. That one is a bit more difficult to gauge, given that Brandon Cooks only caught he caught both of his targets
Yeah.
for 19 yards and also had a rushing attempt for -3 yards. So it's, for me, I mean, I guess Jalen Tolbert offers some kind of. I think it's just going to be kind of back and forth between him and Brandon Cooks, which one is more involved on a week to week basis. I think I trust much more whoever's playing tight end for the Dallas Cowboys,
Yep.
because Luke Schoonmaker stepped in and got 6 targets, which he caught all of for 43 yards, giving him 10.3 fantasy points. Dak is going to throw to the tight end, apparently, regardless of who it is. We'd like it to be Jake Ferguson because we know he's quite talented. But if it's going to be Luke Schoonmaker, for however long that Ferguson is out, I said I wasn't interested last week, but seeing the 6 targets and just knowing how Dak treats his tight ends,
Yeah.
we know the tight end landscape already this year.
For
Hopefully it
sure.
doesn't stay that way, but the way it looks right now, a 10-point week is very valuable for the tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you had Brandon Aubrey, kicked 4 field goals and an extra point, 17 points for him. What do you expect? He's just going to be great.
Yeah. It's tough to gauge the Cowboys because half of me, I mean, it makes sense. They were down a lot this game, so Rico Dowdle is their better pass catcher out of the backfield. So he got more run in this one, and that's where most of his points came from. But I mean, it's not like I was crazy high on Zeke either way. But yeah, I don't
And it
think
just makes it more difficult too when Dowdle slightly, but it's more efficient on the ground.
for sure. I think it's at a weird level where I mean, I don't feel comfortable putting either of them in my starting lineup. Like that's the tough part.
Yeah, and I mean, as the weeks go on, um,
We'll probably have a
it
better answer.
grows a bit more difficult also to keep guys like this out of your lineup. When now
Mm-hmm.
going into this week, we have Isaiah Pacheco go down. And I don't exactly know the deal with Rashad White, but we saw him go down in that game. We saw Joe Mixon go down. So, unfortunately, as the weeks go on, I don't like options like Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott, but we're going to have to figure out what's going on with some of these backfields
Yeah,
because as more guys get hurt, these are going to be names we have no choice but to start. So,
you're not wrong.
it's disgusting, but
It is the truth. It is the truth. But I mean, that's all I really had for this one. If you're ready to take a short intermission and come back with part two.
most definitely. We will see you guys in the next one. You already know what it is. I'll save it for the end of the real one.